Hey folks, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic. What do you think of poison in Commander? Only needing 10 poison counters seems a lot easier than dealing 40 damage or 21 commander damage. And it's about to become even easier, as we're getting an entire precon based around poison in Phyrexia, All Will Be One. That's right, the white, black, and green colored precon Corrupting Influence is all about getting at least 3 poison counters on your opponents to unlock bonus abilities of your cards. But before we take a look at the deck, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Plenty more cool Phyrexia All Will Be One content is coming, so don't miss it. The face commander of Corrupting Influence is Ixel, Scion of Atraxa, a 4-mana Phyrexian angel. This 2/5 has flying, vigilance, and the set's new keyword, Toxic. Toxic gives the defending player a set number of poison counters, in this case 2, when the creature deals combat damage to them in addition to the combat damage, not instead of, like with Infect. Additionally, Ixel has Corrupted. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You can cast those cards using any mana. An evasive body that can be both offensive and defensive, and eventually a card advantage engine? Wow, this one does it all. I'm impressed, but I'm concerned. Previously, there hasn't been a lot of ways to get poison counters on players in the command zone, Skithrix or Finn the Fangbearer being notable examples. But Ixel seems very consistent. We'll see how it plays out. But Ixel isn't the only new legend in the deck. We also have Vishgraz the Doomhive. This 5-mana Phyrexian insect is a 3/3 with Menace and Toxic 1, meaning dealing combat damage with them grants 1 poison counter no matter how much damage is also done. When Vishgraz enters the battlefield, create 3 of these cute little Phyrexian mites that can't block and also have Toxic 1. On top of that, oh yeah, Vishgraz gets +1/+1 for each poison counter your opponents have. Yeah, so Vishgraz here goes tall while also going wide. A total nightmare. Baseline, if your opponents have no poison counters, he's 6 power across 4 bodies for 5 mana. That's a good return, but he only gets bigger and bigger the more you chip in and grant poison counters, which is very easy thanks to All Will Be One. We not only have a lot of new ways to proliferate in all of these colors, but the set also has a sub-theme of these mites that Vishgraz creates. It's possible to make these really good little guys that can sneak in for more and more damage, and poison over time. So, I want to retool the deck to focus on Vishgraz here. Let's see what new goodies and old tricks we can work into the list. Speaking of new tricks, there are some other awesome new cards in this deck, starting with Norn's Decree. This 3-mana enchantment is wild, in that whenever a player attacks you, they get a poison counter. And whenever someone attacks a poisoned player, the attacking player draws a card, making this enchantment double dissuasion, a passive source of poison counters. Not only does it make people want to attack you less, it makes them want to attack your opponents more. I really like this one, and it's at home in more decks even if there isn't a poison focus. We also have Glistening Sphere in the deck. This 3-mana rock enters tapped, but when it enters, it proliferates. Often this means we may not really want to play it on curve, but 3 mana to proliferate is, at base, still really good. Compare that to Contagion Clasp or Karn's Bastion, where you're paying 4 mana to proliferate. This mana rock makes mana of any color with the added benefit of making 3 mana of any color if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, making it one of the cheapest multiple mana rocks since Sol Ring and the Monoliths. With a little bit of work, ideally towards something your deck wants to do anyway, this rock comes down, gives someone their 3rd poison counter, and you untap the next turn several turns ahead of your opponent's mana production. I like it, and I'm definitely finding a few homes for it. We also have Norn's Choirmaster, new in this precon. This 5-mana Phyrexian Angel is a 5/4 with flying and first strike, with the added bonus of whenever a commander you control enters the battlefield or attacks, you proliferate. Pretty simple, but a fantastic source of repeated proliferation in white. White often relies on putting counters on creatures to go tall, and this is a way to speed those effects up even further. While it's pretty basic, it is a lot of utility in decks where your commander wants to be attacking and you care about any kind of counters. very common in most white decks. Lastly, we have Phyresis Outbreak. This 3-mana sorcery serves double duty, being a way to start the poison counter train and a one-sided board wipe the longer the game goes on. It starts by giving each opponent a poison counter. Then, creatures your opponents control shrink equal to the poison counters they have individually. If you're able to crank poison counters up to 4 or 5 per opponent, this is way better than something like a Languish, an alternative for some more expensive board wipes, and is safe to put in your own creature-focused decks. I like it a lot. In terms of reprint value, there's not a lot in this deck. Phyrexian Swarmlord, Grafted Exoskeleton, and Norn's Annex are all around the $6 mark, but if you're looking for a banger of value, it's not here. Some good cards to start a collection with, but nothing that justifies buying the precon for a single card. Pretty underwhelming. Let's talk about the good in the out-of-the-box list. There are some really good cards in here, like Scavenging Ooze, Evolution Sage, and Culling Ritual. These are fantastic cards that fit in decks that don't have a heavy focus on poison and are versatile pieces that are at home in a lot of collections. The mana rocks in the deck also slap. We've got Felwar Stone, Golgari Signet, and freaking Chromatic Lantern packed in this list. It's a great start for 3-color decks and almost exactly what I'd pack in the list if I were building it from scratch. Card draw is also pretty good, with one-time draw like Night's Whisper and Painful Truce, through to ongoing card draw like Moldervine Reclamation. The next steps to update or add to card draw here are all pretty costly. Removal is also fantastic. As I mentioned in my Rebellion Rising upgrade video, linked up top, it's not hard to upgrade your removal package with just 1 to 2 cards. But out of the box, this deck has Swords to Plowshares, Beast Within, and both Mortify and Putrefy. I'd potentially only add in Generous Gift to this package to have answers for days for any situation. Now for the bad. For a 3-color deck, they did not do the mana base justice. We have every bad dual land in existence in this deck, from filter lands to show lands and the temples. Wizards really could have thrown new players a bone here with a Triome or check lands. I'm not asking for the battle lands or shock lands, but at least some good mid-tier dual lands. It's a 3-color deck, don't make it even more difficult to play. There's also a large saturation of board wipes in the deck. Fumigate, Merciless Eviction, Phyrexian Rebirth, on top of Culling Ritual mentioned earlier. This is largely a creature-based deck, and creature-centric decks don't want to be running this many board wipes. It's only going to make games drag on, and it's only going to set your game plan back further than your opponent. I'm an advocate for interaction and removal, but in large quantities, and in a deck that can't rebuild or protect itself, I would skip some of these. Speaking of being creature-centric, I take a bit of issue with the curve of creatures in this deck. It's very heavy on small creatures, specifically 2-mana creatures. Blight Mamba, Blightbelly Rat, and Cankerbloom, and many more. I know the goal of the deck is to get some early poison counters on opponents and then proliferate them up, but there's no long game in this deck. It's not that creatures are bad, it's just that they fold if faced with any kind of resistance. There is also only 2 creatures that are over 5 mana in the list. Glissa's Retriever, which is more of a utility creature, and Phyrexian Swarmlord. Swarmlord is a game ender, for sure, but the deck is lacking those. The new Wormquake is a big help here too, making us ideally big trampling toxic creatures. Because the focus is on creatures on the low end of your curve, much of your utility is on the higher end of the curve. Card draw at 5 and 6 mana isn't exactly where you want it to be. This means you've got to take a whole turn off to work towards refilling your hand. Caress of Phyrexia in particular, while having utility in blasting your opponents with it, is way too much mana to be paying for that effect. I also feel, inherently, that a poison-themed deck in Commander is very easily going to gain the ire of other players. Be careful if you sit down to play a deck that seeks to, at its core, reduce the clock on a game. This is a deck and a theme that players may ask you not to play, or that may earn you a lot of focused aggression at the table. Be prepared. If I'm adding just 10 cards to this deck, here are my picks. First is Dow the Embrace. This enchantment can be activated to give target creature shadow until end of turn, meaning the creature can't block unless it's other shadow creatures and can't be blocked unless by other shadow creatures. Great for getting your little toxic creatures through for those first poison counters. or the last ones. You could also use this on opponents' creatures you don't want blocking too, as a neat little trick. Now I'd also add the new Skrelv's Hive to this deck. This isn't quite a Bitter Blossom, but it's a great way to have a steady supply of toxic creatures coming through. Better, once someone has 3 or more poison counters, your toxic creatures get lifelink. Great because your legends have toxic, and because you'll need to regain some life, because opponents will be putting a beating on you. If we're adding Skrelv's Hive, we can add the new Skrelv Defector Might too. Baseline, they're a 1/1 toxic can't block creature, but it's that activated ability that's a big bonus. For a Phyrexian white mana, you can give a creature hexproof from a color of your choice, blanking targeted removal, but also Toxic 1. Here's the fun thing, Toxic stacks. So if a creature already has Toxic 1 and you give it Toxic 1, 2 poison counters. If a creature has Infect and you give it Toxic, your opponent gets an extra poison counter. It does what we want it to do. While we're on the topic of new cards, the new Bloated Contaminator is right where we want it to be in terms of toxic creatures. A 4/4 for 3 with trample, and it proliferates on combat damage. It's like exactly what we want in this deck. And since these recommendations are rares from a new set, they aren't going to be hard to grab copies of. Give it a week and they'll be plentiful and cheap. We do need a few ways for our small creatures to reach the later game and still be relevant. So let's throw in anthems like Always Watching. Not just giving your non-token creatures +1/+1, but also Vigilance, helping you be offensive and defensive at the same time. Excellent because you will be taking heat playing a deck focused on poison counters. We can also add in my favorite anthem in the game, Cathar's Crusade. Yes, a lot of people dislike the accounting it requires, but in a deck full of smaller creatures that only get better when they're bigger, it's a huge bonus. And if we're shifting the commander to Vishgraz, as long as we're playing Crusade before Vishgraz, casting our commander nets us 4 +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures, very quickly taking a weenie army up over the top. Another way we can ensure our small creatures are getting through for valuable poison counters is with Champion of Lambhold. If played before Vishgraz, it'll instantly make opponents' creatures with power 3 or less unable to block yours, which is a fast way to ensure you're chipping in. Every little bit helps at first. Then we can sit back and proliferate towards the win. For repeated proliferating, I really like Park Heights Maverick from the new Capenna Commander precons. This one comes down a lot sooner than some of your other proliferate engines, and gets in for a lot of damage thanks to the Dethrone ability too. Since it also proliferates on combat damage, or when it goes to the graveyard, it means even if it can't sneak in for damage a couple of times, it still gets you closer to that win. 4 ways to remain defensive. No Mercy was just reprinted in Dominaria Remastered, making it more affordable and easier to get than ever. This enchantment ensures that if you're being attacked, it better be for lethal, or those creatures won't be attacking again. It's a great deterrent, and gets better and better with our pillow fort effects like Ghostly Prison too. No one's going to want to pay 2 mana to attack you and lose their creature. And finally, a way for us to be offensive and help reset our life totals with Loxodon Warhammer. Giving our toxic creatures trample is amazing, and while some of them have trample already, our little guys don't. And if we absolutely need to get through, this goes a long way, while also helping us gain life with lifelink. We're paying life for cards in the deck, and we're likely going to be a bit of a focus for opponents, so every little bit of life gain helps. For upgrades, if we're adding some dollars to the list, we can boost some of the removal package. Mortify could easily become Assassin's Trophy, and Putrefy can become Abrupt Decay if we're looking at removing threats standing in the way of our little guys. We could find room for Yawgmoth Thran Physician too. He makes an excellent source of repeated proliferation, while also being a source of card draw and removal. Basically everything we'd want in one package. That Loxodon Warhammer I mentioned could just as easily be a Shadow Spear for the same benefit, with the added bonus of letting you pop indestructible or untargetable creatures, while also being easier to cast too. That's all upside, though for considerably more dollars. The new card Noxious Assault serves our purposes, but I would really want that to be a Triumph of the Hordes. It's a divisive card for sure, but it's what this deck wants to do. Infect and Toxic do stack, so it's a game ender for 4 mana, even with your small creatures being the only attackers you may have. And ideally, I'd put Sword of Truth and Justice in the list too. This gives us a nice power and toughness boost, a way to get in against pesky blue and white players, and a way to make our little creatures bigger with a repeatable source of proliferation. It's literally everything this deck wants on a single card. Be sure to check out the upgraded list over on my profile at my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is the best deck building platform in the world, and use the history function, allowing you to see what I've removed or added to this deck. Be sure to follow my profile while you're there for all my latest brews. Check out my upgrade for Rebellion Rising here too, and of course, as always folks, good luck and have fun.